Hi Guy, welcome to the AMIGArama podcast. I'm your host Lefarius, and for this week we will be having a look at Valhalla and the Lord of Infinity, which is a game I've wanted to cover for some time. But as always, before we jump in, let's go and have a look at some of this week's news. First up is something I noticed on vintageisthenewOld.com, a game called Zyriax, and basically describe it as a horizontal scroller for the Amiga that was developed by the WizKids, a group of Belgium-based coders, and released by Software Business way back in 1990. Now, looking at this closely, they've patched this heavily, so now that it supports all Amigas right from OCS to AGA, 020 plus, including every memory configuration. Does not crash anymore on level 3 or other strange situations. End of game / credit part is reachable. Oh, you mustn't have been able to complete the other one. High score table works properly now. Standard 880k ADF, fast loading, which is always a plus, and uses extra memory if available. Now, I was having a look at this and a bit of a play, and at first it reminded me of R-Type, and then as I got further and further along into it, bear in mind shooters are not really my genre, so to speak, but it reminded me more and more of Gradius the further I got in. The bosses weren't as big as R-Type, and it was that spaceship style, but there was no floating ball or anything. But it was quite intriguing. It was quite a fun game to play, and I'd well recommend you go and download a copy. As always, I will stick a link into the show notes. Now, a couple of years ago, somebody put together a collection of all the Amiga Dizzy games and stuck them onto the CD32. It was a nice little compilation, awesome little menus and stuff, you know, absolutely fantastic. Now, someone's got together with a group of coders on company.pl, and again, links in the show notes, and they've put all the Amiga versions, so they now work on the PC, and when you launch it as a program, it runs through an Amiga emulator, which sounds a bit long-winded and probably the wrong way around, but I don't think there were any Dizzy games ever released on the PC, so it's certainly an awesome collection to go back to and probably worth a download. Now, one thing I did want to mention, I've not really brought this up before because this is an Amiga podcast after all, but it's something of note, and I went and ordered one of those new mini C64s, which is packed full of Commodore 64 games, and it's got like a Competition Pro style USB joystick, and it's all in a mini package. It only literally arrived about 2 days ago, and I've not really had much of a chance to play it pretty much. I've unboxed it, got it all out, and my setup is a mess. Let's see what, I'm not putting pictures up, so don't ask, but it's a bit of a nightmare. I have to move the TV and plug things in and sort it all out, so I'm going to try it in a couple of days, I think, put some proper time into playing some C64 games, but it looks absolutely fantastic. It's a nice plush box. It looks like a miniature version of the C64, and the Competition Pro, I mean, that's something I've never been a fan of as a kid, but, you know, going back to it now and playing it, it is a fantastic feeling joystick. I'm not sure if I'll be able to use it as on a regular basis, but the fact that this device has got like USB slots in the side, I think you're going to be able to use other controllers on that, and I've got plenty of pads knocking around. I think I've got like a PS3 USB one somewhere, so I should be alright. I'm quite chuffed to bits with this, and I'm looking forward to playing it. With that, let's jump into this week's game, and this time I've picked Valhalla Lord of Infinity. Now, this is something I'm very familiar with back in the day. I actually managed to pick it up when I was a kid. I think this was off the back of the Amiga Action demo. Now, I was absolutely obsessed with this. You know, it was something I would constantly play, and I'll admit that when I first started doing the podcast, after about episode 2 and 3, I started thinking to myself, well, I should be looking really at the games I'm very familiar with because it gives me something to talk about. And I did keep trying to get into Valhalla, but every time I sat down with it, it's quite a long game and it takes a lot of getting into and getting used to. And it does have quite a lot of history behind it. So I'll admit, guys, for ages now, I've just left it. I've just wussed out of it for ages. But now it's time to tackle it. I mean, I've been sat down with it, I've played it properly, and I'm ready to go. Now, it was published by a company called Vulcan, developed by them as well. Now, they were I was surprised to find this out myself, because I was only really ever familiar with the Valhalla games, but they were behind the likes of Genetic Species, which was like a Doom clone, Final Odyssey, and that looked a bit like a Diablo-style RPG game from what I could see of the screenshots. Something called Timekeepers. Now, that was a really weird one. It was like a top-down game, but from the screenshot off the main title screen, and it looked like it was lemmings in military uniforms. Oh, and Europa 2. Now, I could have gone on and on and on with this games list, because I think they produced about 15, 16 games they came to being in 94, so they produced a hell of a lot of Amiga games. Now, discs, this had 6 in total, and it was a bit of a weird one because it was hard drive installable, because I did do this back in the day, but it was nice and easy. You could just create like a game drawer, drag and drop the contents from each disc and just paste it straight into a folder, and it would all just work. Now, back in the day, most games would not work with a hard drive without special installers, so this was especially refreshing, and even reading about it now, I'm surprised that even worked. Now, I had a 20 meg hard drive back in the day. Now, I did try loading this off the floppy disk versions, but it took a hell of a long time to keep doing various loads, and in the end I just gave up and went on the WHD load version, which was nice and smooth, and there was next to no loading after that. So if you are going back to it, if you don't want to end up, because I think this is quite expensive as well on eBay, you probably have better going with WHD load. Now, as I said, it came out in 1994. It was the first game that Vulcan actually produced, and it launched them down a hell of a long line. And the price at the time was $25.99. And one of the interesting things I found out about it was coded entirely in AMOS, which is like an Amiga OS operating system language. Now, from what I could tell from that online, not a lot of people were fans of it as a programming language. I think they all started moving away from it towards Blitz Basic, which was more game related and more. So this coming out in AMOS was very, very impressive, especially as we go into the game, you'll see. But for the type of game it was and for the size and stuff, they really they knew what they were doing. It's really impressive. It was coded by a chap called Paul Hale Carrington. He was a co-director of Vulcan. Again, 15 Amiga games I've got noted down here. He was responsible for the graphics and the music. It was a very, very small team. The sound and voice, yes, there's voice in this, were by Lisa Tunner, I may be pronouncing that wrong. Again, she was a co-director of Vulcan as well. She also did all of the story for this and the design. Now, Vulcan, I said, opened in 94, and it seems that they focused on the Amiga until 1999, when pretty much the market was dying. And from what I could see online, there was a lot of rage at them at the time that they were leaving the scene and moving on to the PC, but I suppose people needed to accept really that the Amiga was pretty much dead. Commodore wasn't coming back, or no one was going to swoop in and buy all the rights, which seemed to have been the craze at the time. People still do it to this day. They think, there's a chance Commodore will come back and we'll do this and we'll do that, but it's gone. The time's gone. There was another thing I did notice on some of the stuff I could find out about this. A company from Poland actually did a clone of the game, so it was like this very similar graphic style and stuff, and it was called Poltergeist, and that came out in 1995. Now, Valhalla actually had a prequel and a sequel. From what I could see, there were plans to do something called Valhalla 3D. Now, that seemed to be on and off for several years, but the last sort of note I could find out about that seemed to come from around about 2012, and it's all gone quiet since, and there's been, no news and stuff. So that was, from what I could tell, seemed to be like a first-person perspective game. Maybe they were going to go back into the dungeon design, but instead of being top-down, you're actually exploring the world. All the Valhalla games did have PC remakes. They did have some slight interface changes as well as graphical overhauls. Nothing major, but I mean the Amiga was limited by, I think it 32 colours or so on at the time, so it was a pretty limited palette. So they really jigged it up and redid the colours for the PC versions. It's probably worth going back that just to have a look because it's quite interesting. You can actually still buy they're like mini episodes of all the Valhalla games put together, and I think it works out at about 12 episodes, and those are available from vulcan.co.uk. The first episode is free, again these are the PC editions, and then I think it's about £2.50 or so on for each episode. After all, you can buy them in a pack for various prices, but it's still available, you can still get it. Now, one of the biggest things about this game, especially at the time, is that it was the first ever Amiga game with actual speech in it. Not just like a couple of samples thrown in during a video or stuff. There was full speech throughout. All the characters, they would talk at each other and stuff. So, for what it was at the time, this was a bit of a technical marvel. Now, I did mention before I had an Amiga Action demo. Now, the thing they released was a bit of a funny one because it was pretty much the first level, but they pretty much used all like the textures and stuff from the fourth level of the main game, which is a bit weird going back to it. So the one I was actually playing to death before I bought the full-time version was this. But it worked really, really well because the thing is with the opening level, it's all set in a crypt and it's dark and grimy and stuff. So by changing the colour palette a bit, it lightened it up, I think, and it was more enticing for people to play. Now, as a kid, I absolutely loved this off the back of the demo. It was just my sort of game straight away, and it actually made me save up for ages. I can remember, scrabbling around to get money for months trying to get the full version. And the great thing about it when it did turn up, it was this nice big flush black box and everything, and then it had like the letters in flames on the front and like this red surround. It was absolutely gorgeous. It was at the time one of my favourite box games ever. And I would spend so many nights on this and weekends and stuff, but weirdly, for the type of game it was, I could never get past the actual second level, which is really, really depressing if you think about it. Usually to dig into a game at this point, I'd have a look at the manual and maybe read out the introduction. But for this game, I mean, my God, it's 11 pages long. Now, this is some really, really detailed story. And to cut it down into just my idea of a summary, is basically there's a really good king. His little brother comes along and basically kills him. They get into a big war between each other. He wants to be king. The main king refuses. He's really evil. They get into a battle. Blah blah blah. The brother kills him, but he manages to get his son out of the country before it all happens. And as the game comes around, it all turns out that the main character of the game is his son, is the prince, and it's all about how he works his way through the castle and the crypts and so on, and then takes out the Lord of Infinity, who is as evil as they come. Now, the great thing is when you first start the game, you do get this described to you in a huge introduction, which is all in speech with a little prince going through it in some detail. Now, the game itself it's like a top-down puzzle game. Now, I'm not sure how really that sounds, but the main idea behind it is you have to explore each section, pick up items, go somewhere else, solve problems. So, you pick up item A, give it to someone at place B, they might exchange it for something, you wander somewhere else. It's very simple, like logical puzzles to that extent. Now, the graphics for this are absolutely gorgeous, and I mean really, really stunning. They do reuse a fair bit of assets because I mean, like the main screen, the way it's laid out is on the top, you've got 9 big squares. You've got this lovely surround with all these like metallic curls on and stuff and icons and stuff. But right at the top, you've got 9 item boxes, which are like your inventory. You've got the main screen in the middle where you see your character. Now, that's just a simple 5x5 square grid. You can move up, down, left and right. And as you do so, the screen scrolls with it straight away. Now, one of the great things about this game straight away is there is no slowdown on this scrolling whatsoever. It's nice, it's smooth, it's perfect. It's how you would want it to be. To the left and right, you've got like a stamina bar, and then the one's like it's like a time bar for potions or how much of an effect they've got left. And along the bottom, you've got like 5 selectable icons, and those are basically your main usage. So you've got like an eyeball, which is look, a hand for take, like a use icon, which is just a finger pointing. Then there's a joystick. Now that basically lets you flick between a walking mode and using the button modes on the top of the bottom, and a save icon, which is pretty much straightforward. Now this is joystick only. There is no keyboard whatsoever. Now that might sound a bit complicated, the fact that you've got all these inventory and all these buttons and toggling on the bottom, but I mean the main character can only move up, down, left and right. If you press fire, it lets you flick left and right through the icons at the bottom. If you hold fire and up, I think it is, it lets you select something from the inventory along the top, and every time you tap fire on one of the icons, it basically lets you use the icons on the lower part of the screen. God, I'm making this sound really complicated, and I will say, when I first started playing it, because I had to wrap my head around how that works, and it felt really clunky, but literally within a few minutes it clicks into place, and I think when they were designing the game, they've really thought about this, and you want to be able to move through things quickly and to be able to respond to stuff on the spot when you try to work puzzles out. You don't want to spend forever and a day messing around with different icons and things, but it all just works perfectly. Just trust me on that one. What else can I say? Now, there are lots and lots of logic puzzles dotted throughout this game. There's piles and piles of fun traps, like holes in the floor, spikes, you can be electrocuted, fire, as well as various things like locked doors. Yes, I've already said traps, haven't I? And items to pick up and stuff. Everything is very well drawn. They always look like the item you actually need to use. And by looking at something, the prince will actually look up at the screen above your head and will actually comment on it. He'll tell you what it is, or whether or not it'll work if you try using it. Now, from the puzzles I saw, and when I was, because I played this for several hours, you didn't seem to be using items with one another. You weren't doing it in your own inventory. You were always using it like on the main screen. So you would put something on, say, a table. So you talk to something, put an item on the table, and it would swap it, or there would be a solution put through. Now, one of the funny things in the opening section throughout the game, you know, there are lots of characters that you can talk to, and they do talk back to you. But the greatest thing about this is the prince chats to you constantly, and you've got like loads and loads of like lines you can use, like he will look up and say, "Oh, you've got it," or "Incredible, that's amazing." If you look at some like blood stain on the floor, it's like, "It's dirty." And I love the fact that the characters also interact. You see a fair few of them throughout the various levels. There's 4 in total, and they will actually talk back to you, and you can interact with them when you give your items and stuff. And again, but the great thing straight away is that they all talk to you. And one of the funniest things I thought when I first started playing it is you're in like, it's like a crypt or a dungeon, and you talk to these skulls, and they've got a really big booming voice. It's like Death or something out of one of the Terry Pratchett Discworld novels. And they give you like a little clue, like something simple, like "Bring me some wine," or one of them will say, "Do you love me?" And you just, you know, you'll stand there scratching your head thinking, "I suppose." But if you then wander around the dungeon for a bit, you can find like a wilted rose. And if you can find some water, well, it's called the water of life, you can bring the rose back to life. And then if you give it to the skull, it gets all quite happy and it solves the puzzle for you. It's quite funny, and there's a fair bit of humour there tied into it. Of course, there's loads and loads of like collectible items, not just for solving puzzles. There's things like boosting your stamina, giving yourself more health. It's called stamina, it's health effectively. Fire, cold protection, which pretty much do what they say on the tin. You can get through some traps if it's electric, something like that. Even things like a strength potion, so you can pick up massive rocks. Keys for opening chests and doors. You know, they're pretty simple, like dungeon fare. Now, the great thing about it is there is tons and tons of, it's like British humour. I don't know what else to call it, but it's absolutely fantastic. The main character, when he actually walks, he puts his hands behind his back, you know, and as he walks, his big belly wobbles, which sounds absolutely ridiculous. But at the same time, the hair on top of his head actually flops up and down, and it's incredible just how well animated it is just for a single characters. character even. Now, dotted throughout, there's a weird mix of like fantasy and futuristic tech. I mean, one of the funniest things I saw, the oddest thing even on the first level, you can actually find a credit card and he'll say, oh, it's a credit card, and it's supposed to be like this medieval type world, and there's a machine that it can be used to get through to a door. And then later on, as you get further in the game, you can find like a voice recorder to solve puzzles, and you can feed it little messages and things, and it like very, very strange and bizarre. I don't know what they were going for there. It sort of works, but I suppose they could have come up with something more fitting for the era. Now, what I'm describing is quite a simple game, and the biggest plus point about this, it's not just a plus point, it's absolutely amazing what they've done, and it's the speech. I mean, there'd been nothing like this before on the Amiga, and there was very little after it, to be honest. I have no idea how they actually managed to do this, especially seeing as it's only on 6 discs, but from what I could read about it, the print alone has a vocabulary of like over 1,000 words, and these are all proper. It's not like really dodgy like computerized voices. These are actual proper sentences, and it's all stringed together, and it sounds very, very natural. Now, you would think he would become quite annoying because some of the time, he does repeat a lot of the lines repeatedly, and most of them are quite short unless you're in like a story sort of pushed area. But for the most part, I mean, I found myself growing quite attached to him because as you're solving puzzles and he's agreeing, I mean, he gets scared, and he will, he's like, oh, I'm scared, and he'll make all the noises and stuff, and there's quite a lot of like random sentences throws in there, so there's always a fair bit of humour to enjoy, and the more time you spend with him, I mean, I quite like him by about halfway through the game. When you first hear him, he does sound a bit annoying, the voice can grate quite a bit, but as you're listening to it and he goes out into the world more and you start exploring and picking up books and reading about him and the other characters and what's going on, you really get a sense of this poor guy's really been dropped into the middle of this and he's really struggling to get out of this problem. But again, the voices are just absolutely fantastic. The game does not have any music whilst it's playing. Everything has its own like sound effects. When the prince walks, he's like big feet tap on the floor and stuff. When you use items, there's a response and an icon to it. And there's not really, it's a shame really that there's no like overlying music, but that's probably because they were using so much space on the discs just to fill up all these voices. So it's a bit of a mixed bag really, because it does draw you in well enough. There's enough sound effects there to spook you out enough that it draws you in, but I think at times you do miss that music a bit, but then it might have clashed with the fact of if the Amiga's trying to play sound, maybe it can't play voice and sound at the same time. I'm not entirely sure. By all means, if anybody does, then come and comment on the episodes. Now, one of the problems I found with this is that the puzzles can be a bit repetitive. Now, the game does not have any like super quick or fast moments to, there's not a thing where you're having to get through like a section of it really, really quickly or respond to one part of a puzzle interacting with another. When you move the prince, he turns slowly, he walks back and forth, and there's no like option to run. He's always moving at the same speed. Now, the puzzles are actually fairly tricky. I mean, I got stuck on a fair few points. There's not a lot of clues dotted around, and a lot of them are a bit vague and not random as such. The ones you find, once you know the solution, they sort of all come together and make sense, but there are a lot of times when you sat there and you just head scratching. And there's also loads and loads and loads of wandering. And one thing I did see, which made me chuckle and groan at the same time, but you basically come to the beginning of a corridor and there's like a big wooden sign on the wall which says, this is like the longest walk of your life. And it's a joke, and it's meant to be, because you walk out into the corridor and you go down either direction, and it's a massive walk, and it feels like it takes about 10 or 15 minutes, and you get to the end of it and you're off and away. And it's meant to be a joke, but with the speed that the prince walks and so on, it really is a bit annoying, and it should have been much shorter than it actually is. I get the humour, I get the funny, but when you try to play a big long game like this, I dread to think, if you had to, you don't, but if you had to walk all the way back through that to keep making the puzzles. Now, that's the other problem with it as well. there is no run option. Now, when I played the PC version, there is a button that does it, so it can move quite quickly, but in the Amiga you're restricted to the same speed. Now, it's not too bad for the most part, but if you get stuck and you're having to wander back and forwards and avoid all the same traps and pitfalls and spikes and things, it can become an issue because you'll end up getting quite frustrated at how slow the game can actually be. Now, again, if you're playing this from a solution, because I did cheat a fair few bits where I would have just got stuck normally, but I wanted to get a good way into this, and I've only got so much time to do each episode. So, I thought I'd have a good crack at it, but most of the time I was referring to puzzles. But I could see a point where you would get stuck, and then the answer to it is based like 3/4 of the way across the level that you're actually on, and it would be quite frustrating when you try to work things out and try to find things. And one of the biggest issues I did have with a puzzle is an item was like hidden under a floor tile, and you can look at it and you can pick the tile up and then the item will appear, but it's not always clear enough on the graphics that there's something there. So what you tend to do is you'll walk into the room and constantly scan wherever you are to see if there's a puzzle piece or something underneath. But that was more my own gripe rather than a problem with the game, but I can see it would frustrate people. Well, like I say, the biggest problem is the backtracking there. It really can be an issue. Now, I do love the look of this, but probably my biggest gripe with it is I wish the border part and the main part of the adventure where you see it, it's only 5x5 grid squares. And I'm probably down to the speed of the Amiga at the time, because I think this would work on it, because it was coded on Amiga 500 and it worked a lot better as you had a more powerful Amiga. So I think it was just the limitations of what they could do with the engine. But if that would have been so much better if it had been like 7 grid squares, 8x8, that would have been absolutely perfect, because then you could have taken pretty much a full room at a time, or most of it, and seeing what things were going on. So what tends to happen is you have to go into a room, if it's a big room, explore around it fully, and then try and rethink. And if you want to backtrack left and right or up and down, you can do, but it just means the rooms they're a lot bigger really than they should be, and it would have just benefited with just that little bit more space to explore around. Now, I did say before that this game does come with an intro, which thankfully is fully voiced. I mean, this is a really impressive bit of Amiga tech, but the problem is, if you're not using like a WHD load version or something that's had a bit of a hack put in there to skip the intro, every single time you start the game, and I double check this, you have to watch that intro. And I mean, I was banging all sorts of keys and the mouse and the pad, nothing skips it, and it's several minutes long. And that's fine if you've only seen it like once or twice, but after a very, very short while or a few restarts, especially if you want to get through the game, it does get a bit frustrating. And it was what was a great intro really, really did put me off. Another sort of issue I had with it is you have to save constantly, because a lot of time you can walk into a room and if you've not seen a map or something, or you've not explored properly, you can just walk down over like a cracked stone and then fall down into a pit below, and then you just die. Now, it's quite quick and easy to save the game because it's just a button on the bottom bar, but that in itself becomes a bit frustrating because you're always having to make sure that you've got enough save points. I mean, it's quick and easy enough, but it can become frustrating. Add to the fact is the levels, I'm not sure if this is a gripe as well, but the levels are absolutely huge and they feel absolutely fantastic. And I think it took me about an hour and 40 minutes to get through the very first stage of it, which is fantastic. I was working my way through, but then when I started looking at some puzzle solutions and videos and stuff online, and you can see that, what really should be short and maybe been about 25-30 minutes, because the levels are absolutely huge and they really do span out. Adding the fact that you're doing lots and lots of backtracking, it doesn't make it as good as it should be, and it can be quite frustrating. Now, of course, every game has its bad points, and I had to pick some out for it, despite how miserable I might have just sounded. But one of the peculiar things about this, especially back in the day, was the magazine scores. Now, it had proper crazy results. Now, Amiga Action, who got the first demo, they gave it 94% on release, and straight away you think, oh, that's spot on, there's something that must be a good game. But then CU Amiga gave it 90% as well, and slap bang in the middle was with 58% was Amiga Computing. Then it started getting even more insane. Amiga Format gave it 23%. 23%. I mean, what was wrong with it? And then Amiga Power, 19%. I say, I'm even in shock reading it out now from my own notes. Another one was The One at 81%. Now, that's crazy. There's proper like seesaw results there. I don't know what the hell was going on. I mean, bear in mind, like Vulcan was a brand new company, so it's not like, you know, the guys haven't come from some big major corporation like, say, Team 17, where they've got problems going on with some of them. I think it was Amiga Action or Amiga Power had problems with them. There was nothing like that. There's no sort of history going on there, and they really did mark it down. And when you read through the reviews and start going over the stuff that they mentioned about it, yeah, there's valid points there, but there is not a 19% game. A 19% game, it would have to be absolutely dreadful for that level. I mean, the lower scores, they just don't make sense. Now, I understand that it's a bit of a Marmite game. I mean, I quite like puzzle type games and slow, ponderous games like this, and I can understand it being very Marmite like, but it does have its plus points. But just because you don't like it, you can't mark a game down that poorly. You know, especially these were professional reviews. They should have been sat there thinking, yeah, I don't like this, I don't get on with this, but I can understand why this is good, why other people would enjoy this. Very, very, very bizarre. Now, as you can probably tell, I mean, going back to this, I absolutely loved it. I mean, it reminded me of being a kid again and how addicted I was to it then. I'm definitely going to go on and complete it. I've spent several hours this week alone just trying to get through this. I mean, I'm just about 3/4 of the way through the third level at the moment, and I'm absolutely loving it. I mean, now, yes, I'll admit I've been cheating a bit trying to get through with like puzzle solutions and stuff, especially on the tricky ones, but I've had a fantastic time playing with it, and I suspect you lot will as well. Now, the biggest thing about this is the voices. I've never heard or seen anything like this on the Amiga before. They really do make this game and make it stand out, and it would have been an absolute treasure trove of goodness back in the day, and it was something that really showed what the Amiga could do. I don't think the PC market at the time was in a similar sort of boat, because I don't think because CD-ROM was a thing, yeah, when they were producing like full voice and everything, but it wasn't really the same sort of thing. It wasn't an actual system capable of producing this sort of thing. I mean, I wish I knew how they did it. I mean, how the hell did we manage to record so many voices and so many words and get it squeezed in? Is it an engine? Is it recorded voices being played back as like WAV files or something? I mean, I would assume if there wasn't something special to it, that every other game at the time would have been doing it. And I know it's on 6 discs and everything, but when you've got, say, like Monkey Island 2 or Beneath a Steel Sky and Flight of the Amazon Queen, and they're all like 1,000,001 discs, and you've got this with all them voices on 6, there's something strange happening there, but it's really, really impressive. Now, one of the most amazing things about it is the story. It's really involving, it's entertaining, and yeah, it's a fantasy world and it's all about kings and princes and going back and forth, but it's really entertaining. It's well thought out, and it's quite dark as well, which is very, very different for the time. It's a very slow and ponderous story, but it draws you on, it makes you interested in the world and the characters, and it certainly makes me want to play the other games. I want to see the rest of the story. Now, the next game is actually is the prequel, and it's all about the Lord of Infinity before he came that, so, you know, I believe you have to go through the murder and stuff, but just to see that part of the story, it's had some fantastic reviews from what I could see of it as well, but I want to go on, I want to see the rest of the story, and the last game as well, just to see what they've done with it. As a kid, this was an absolute obsession. I lost so much time to it, and I can still remember being so frustrated and flicking through magazines at the time trying to get past the points I was stuck on, and it never happened, I'm afraid. Like I said, I never got past that second level, but hopefully I will from now on. I'm tempted. It's games like this, and say like Hero Quest, or where the fantasy element is great because it adds that little bit of story, but this one is just that extra level there, and it's entertaining enough. And yeah, it has its problems, but it has more than enough good stuff within just to keep you drawn on and to keep exploring and to keep going. And I'm definitely going to be going back to the sequels. And most of all, it makes me want to explore the rest of Vulcan's library, and the fact that they've got 15 or so games to go through, and they're not all like this sort of top-down RPG style either, so they really have got an impressive library, and I'm really looking forward to it. Now that will be as good a time as any to finish. Now if you've any comments or questions, you can send me an email at lefarius@amigarama.com, or just come along to amigarama.com and have a look around the site. There will be some gameplay footage of this posted up alongside with the podcast itself. It's always worth checking out. Thanks for listening, and I will see you next time.